Imagine a city, right, completely besieged by two different armies.
It is a totally terrifying scenario.
Oh, absolutely. So the Prussian military is just camped outside the gates. They have this suffocating perimeter set up. And meanwhile, the French National Army, the one from Versailles, is literally bombarding the western neighborhoods with artillery fire.
Right, shells actually falling on their heads.
Exactly. And the citizens trapped inside are starving. Supply lines are cut, the economy has totally ground to a halt, and communication with the outside world is, well, it's virtually non-existent.
Yeah, they are completely cut off.
But here's the wild part. Inside this chaotic, starving, bombarded city, the newly elected leaders are just sitting around in the Hotel Ville, passing laws about ending night shifts for bakers.
It is so surreal.
Right. I mean, they are dismantling the police state. They're rethinking the very nature of human relationships, of marriage, and even like the democratization of fine art.
It really defies almost every conventional logic of wartime governance. I mean, typically, a government under military siege immediately declares martial law, right?
Yeah, they lock everything down.
Exactly. They centralize authority, they hoard resources, and they suspend civil liberties in the name of survival. But the Paris Commune of 1871 did the exact opposite.
They really did.
They decentralized power, radically expanded democratic participation, and attempted to build this entirely new social order while, as you said, under literal bombardment.
Which brings us to today's topic. Welcome back, everyone, to our ongoing deep dive into the historical archive. This is part 4 of our 7-part series on the 1871 Paris Commune.
Yes, welcome back.
For those of you who've been following along, you've journeyed with us through the origins of the Franco-Prussian War, the devastating collapse of the Second Empire under Napoleon III, and, of course, the initial spontaneous uprising of March 18th in our previous sessions.
Which really set the stage for what we're talking about today.
Definitely. So today, you are stepping right into the halls of the Hotel de Ville, which was the administrative heart of Paris.
Right, and we're going to focus on the period from late March through May of 1871.
Right, so just a few weeks, really.
Yeah, a very short but intense window. Our mission today is to execute a deeply objective, scholarly Marxist analysis of the Commune's internal working structure and its radical social decrees.
To really get into the weeds of how this worked?
Exactly. To understand exactly how the Commune functioned, we're looking at it through the lens of those who studied its blueprints most intensely. So we're drawing from the writings of Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, Vladimir Lenin, and the primary historical records and decrees of the Commune itself.
But before we jump into the actual mechanics of these decrees, it is really essential to establish our framework here.
Oh, definitely. That's a crucial point.
Right. So while this deep dive uses Marxist theory to analyze these historical events, mostly because that is the specific focus requested by the source material we are unpacking today, we are not taking a political side here.
No, not at all.
Our goal is strictly to analyze the architecture of this revolutionary governance. We're here to impartially convey the ideas, the theories, and the material realities contained in these historical sources.
Right, we're just laying it out for you.
Exactly. Without endorsing the viewpoints of the communards, the Marxists, or the government at Versailles, for that matter, we are simply examining the blueprints.
And those blueprints, interestingly enough, begin with a fundamental destruction of what came before.
Because they couldn't just use the old system, right?
Exactly. When the Central Committee of the National Guard handed power over to the newly elected Commune Council in late March, they faced an immediate problem. They physically possessed the buildings of the government, the ministries, the post offices, the police stations.
Right, they had the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah. And the traditional political instinct would be to just, well, install their own people into those existing offices and start giving orders.
Like just swap out the managers.
Right. But Marx argued that that was actually the fatal flaw of previous revolutions. He noted that the working class cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made state machinery and wield it for its own purposes.
Why not, though? I mean, a post office is a post office, isn't it?
Well, the bureaucratic military state machine of the Second Empire wasn't just some neutral tool. Marx described it as and this is a great quote, a parasitic excrescence.
Oh, wow. A parasitic excrescence. That is quite the visual.
It really is. Basically, a growth that feeds off the host body of society while standing above it, actively repressing it.
So it's actively hostile to the people it's supposedly governing?
Exactly. The state, in that 19th century imperial context, was designed specifically to enforce the rule of a tiny elite over the vast majority.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
So it's hierarchies, it's standing armies, it's secret police, All those mechanisms are built for top-down control.
Hmm.
You cannot use a machine built for oppression to manufacture liberation.
Oh, I see.
So Marx argued the commune had to completely smash it.
Okay, so the first strike against that machine was amputating its physical force, right? Because on March 29th, the Commune issued a decree totally abolishing the standing army and military conscription.
Right, a huge move.
Yeah, and the regular military was replaced entirely by the National Guard, which was fundamentally just the armed populace.
And the mechanics of this shift are really vital to understand.
How so?
Well, under the Second Empire, the army was this professional, separate caste. They were often recruited from the rural peasantry, housed in isolated barracks, and trained to obey unquestioningly.
Which made them highly effective at putting down urban worker rebellions, because they had no connection to the city people they were shooting at.
Exactly. But the National Guard, conversely, was organized by neighborhood. The commanders were actually elected by the ranks.
Wait, elected officers?
Yes, and the soldiers lived in their own homes among their families and neighbors. So this ensured that the military force could never really be turned against the population because the military force literally was the population.
Wow. Which fundamentally alters the power dynamic of the entire city. But they didn't stop at just the military, did they? They completely re-engineered the political administration, too.
They really did.
Because our sources note this really critical distinction, the Commune was not a parliamentary body, but a working body. Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. So in a traditional bourgeois parliamentary system, which we might define as like a representative democracy functioning within a capitalist framework, you have a strict separation of powers.
Right. Checks and balances, the three branches.
Exactly. The legislature debates, compromises, passes laws. Marx viewed these parliaments quite cynically, though. He called them talking shops, designed to give the illusion of participation while the real power was wielded behind the scenes.
Okay, so who held the real power in that view?
The executive branch. The unelected bureaucrats, the police chiefs, the military generals, the people who actually enforce the laws. But the Commune collapsed that distinction entirely.
They collapsed it, so it was executive and legislative at the exact same time.
Yes.
But how did that actually work in practice? I mean, if you are a member of the Commune Council, you aren't just voting on a law to reform education and then going home while some anonymous ministry implements it, right?
Precisely the opposite. The council was divided into 10 commissions, things like labor, education, public services, finance, and so on.
Oh.
And the elected representatives who debated and passed the decrees regarding, say, education were the exact same individuals physically tasked with going out into the arrondissements, inspecting the schools, and ensuring the new curriculum was implemented.
Oh, wow. So they were essentially their own bureaucrats.
Right. The lawmakers were directly responsible for the execution, which means they couldn't just hide behind bureaucratic red tape if a policy failed.
That is an insane level of accountability. And that was reinforced by something called universal recalability, right? Or the mandat imperatif, the binding mandate.
Yes, the binding mandate.
Which is a concept that traces back to the radical days of the French Revolution. It was deeply influenced by thinkers like Rousseau, who basically believed that giving away your sovereignty to a representative for 4 years was just a temporary form of slavery.
That's a great way to summarize it. The mandat imperatif meant that an elected official was not sent to the Hôtel de Ville to just vote based on their own personal conscience or, political expediency.
They weren't free agents.
No, not at all. They were given very specific, formal instructions by their constituents at the local political clubs. And those constituents maintained the power to instantly revoke that representative's mandate if they strayed from those instructions.
Okay, but the mechanics of this are staggering when you consider they were in a literal war zone.
It is wild to think about.
Right. Like the local political clubs, which often met in the evenings in these requisition churches, they acted as constant watchdogs. Citizens would gather, debate the day's decrees, and if they felt their representative was compromising the socialist or defensive goals of the commune, they could just circulate a petition.
Yep, just right there in the church.
And if it gained enough signatures, that official was stripped of their power immediately. And the sources say the police and the judiciary were subjected to this exact same process, right?
They were. It effectively decentralized power down to the absolute smallest neighborhood unit. The objective was to prevent the rise of an insulated, untouchable political class.
Right.
But the most profound mechanism they utilized to prevent careerism was actually economic. And this brings us to the famous 6,000 franc salary cap.
Oh, yes. This is a big one. The Commune decreed that the absolute maximum salary for any public servant, from the highest-ranking general or council member down to the lowest clerk, was 6,000 francs a year.
Right. A hard cap.
And to contextualize this for you, 6,000 francs was roughly the wage of a highly skilled workman in Paris at the time.
Yeah, comfortable working class wage, but nothing extravagant.
Exactly. To put that in modern terms, imagine if the law mandated that the president, every senator, every Supreme Court justice, and every four-star general was legally required to make the exact same median wage as, like, a local plumber, a master carpenter, or a public school teacher.
It is almost impossible to imagine in today's political climate.
Complete.
But the sociological impact of such a decree is massive. It entirely eliminates the financial incentive for seeking public office.
Right, you're not doing it to get rich.
Exactly. You no longer attract individuals who are just looking to enrich themselves or secure lucrative post-political board seats or accumulate wealth through, representation allowances.
And Lenin placed massive theoretical weight on this specific decree, didn't he? In his writings, he points to the 6,000 franc cap as the exact moment quantity becomes quality.
Yes. That phrase, quantity becoming quality, is a core tenet of Marxist dialectics.
Could you break that down for us?
Sure. Lenin is essentially arguing that when you introduce democratic measures as fully and consistently as the Commune did, the very nature of the system changes.
Okay.
You strip away the privileges, the wealth accumulation, the total insulation of high office. So the quantity of these democratic acts reaches a critical mass, and it transforms the quality of the state itself. It ceases to be a bourgeois democracy, which they viewed as a democracy really only for the propertied classes, and transforms into a proletarian democracy, where the working class actually holds structural dominance.
Because the state reflects them perfectly.
Right. At that point, the state is no longer this special, separate force used for the suppression of the masses.
Right.
It becomes an administrative tool of the masses. And according to theory, it begins to slowly wither away as a traditional state.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because I want to push back on this a bit.
Go ahead.
How does that hyper-democratic structure actually function in the reality of a brutal civil war? Because combining the executive and legislative branches, making every single official, including your military generals, instantly recallable by a popular vote, paying military commanders the wage of a baker. I mean, that sounds beautifully egalitarian.
It does.
But a war cannot be run by committee. If a National Guard battalion can just vote to fire their commanding officer on a Tuesday because they don't like an order to march, that sounds like a massive tactical liability against the professional, heavily armed Versailles military right outside their walls.
Oh, you're entirely right. It was a massive liability.
Okay, so it didn't work militarily.
No, from a strictly military and logistical standpoint, the Commune structure was incredibly inefficient. The National Guard was famously undisciplined. Battalions often flat out refused to leave their specific neighborhoods, insisting that their only mandate was local defense.
Just defending their own streets.
Right. They would hold town halls to debate orders while the Versailles army was actively breaching the outer forts.
Wow. So why did they insist on keeping this structure? Why not just say, hey, let's temporarily centralize command just to win the war, and then we'll go back to being hyper-democratic later?
Because for the communards, a centralized authoritarian command structure wasn't just a military tool. To them, it was the very instrument of their oppression. You have to remember, they had just survived the Second Empire. They had watched a highly centralized authoritarian state launch them into a totally disastrous war with Prussia, squander their resources, and enrich a tiny elite.
So they were deeply traumatized by centralized power.
Exactly. If the Commune recreated that exact same authoritarian structure just to defeat Versailles, they genuinely believed they would be betraying the revolution itself.
Ah, I see. The means would destroy the ends.
Exactly. They were attempting to prove in real time that a completely different form of human organization was possible, even under the ultimate stress test of war.
That makes a lot of sense ideologically. And that political restructuring giving power directly to the working class, it immediately paved the way for radical economic intervention.
Had to.
Right, because democratizing the government means very little if the people are still starving in their homes. So the transition from political architecture to economic reality requires us to look at the immediate triage the Commune performed, specifically regarding rent and debt.
Because the economic conditions in Paris in the spring of 1871 were just catastrophic.
Utterly bleak.
The Prussian siege had lasted for months, industry was shuttered, and when the Versailles government temporarily regained control before fleeing the city, One of their very first acts was to end the wartime moratorium on commercial debt and rent.
Which is just cruel timing. They essentially demanded that all back rent, which accumulated during months when nobody could even work, be paid immediately.
Right.
So hundreds of thousands of Parisian workers and small business owners were facing instant eviction and bankruptcy.
Yes, overnight.
But the Commune's response was swift. They issued a retroactive remission of rent for the previous 3 quarters, so from October 1870 up to April 1871.
Just completely wiped it clean.
Yep. All rent paid during that time was to be credited to future periods, and they implemented a complete ban on evictions.
Which is a decree that really recognized that the economic devastation of the war was a collective societal failure, right? Not an individual moral failing.
Definitely. But the decree regarding the Mont-de-Piété, the municipal pawn shops, I think reveals even more about the desperate material conditions of the working class at that time.
Oh, the pawn shops. Yeah.
The municipal pawn shops under the Second Empire functioned essentially as this highly regressive tax on the absolute poorest citizens. It's almost like modern-day predatory payday lending.
It really was.
The historical sources note that the interest rates were a staggering 9.5%. And during the famine of the Prussian siege, people weren't pawning, like, luxury items or jewelry. They were pawning the mattresses off their beds.
Yeah, literally sleeping on the floor.
Exactly. They were pawning the basic tools they needed to make a living. The London Times reported that starving Parisian seamstresses had pawned 1,500 pairs of scissors just to buy bread.
It's heartbreaking. And it creates a perfectly enclosed, totally inescapable cycle of poverty.
How so?
Well, think about it. Without the fizzers, the seamstress cannot work. But without the wages from her work, she can never pay the 9.5% interest to redeem the scissors.
Right. She's completely trapped.
The state, basically through the pawn shop, was actively profiting from starvation.
So to break that cycle, the Commune acted. On March 29th, they suspended the sale of all pawn items. Then, in May, they decreed the free retrieval of essential items, specifically tools, clothes, and bedding that were valued under 20 francs.
And the parameters of that specific decree are incredibly revealing.
Which part?
Well, they suspended sales, and they allowed free retrieval, but only under 20 francs.
Oh, right. This is actually a major historical contradiction, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Because if this is a radical, revolutionary, socialist government, a government that, as we just discussed, abolished the national army and capped all salaries, why did they only suspend pawn shop sales at first? Why limit the free returns to items under 20 francs?
It's a great question.
Why didn't they just, throw open the doors of the pawn shops, abolish the debts entirely, and give everyone their belongings back immediately?
Because here you are really seeing the tension between radical socialist need and the deeply ingrained class psychology of the communards themselves.
Their own internal biases.
Exactly. You have to realize many of the leaders in the Hôtel de Ville were not like hardened Marxist revolutionaries. They were skilled artisans, small shopkeepers, accountants, and clerks.
Ah, the middle class, essentially.
Yeah, the petty bourgeoisie.
Mm-hmm.
And they possessed this almost pathological respect for legalism, private property, and bookkeeping.
Bookkeeping, really?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They wanted to dismantle the oppressive nature of the financial system, but they wanted to do it with perfectly balanced ledgers.
That is wild.
The sources show they spent days locked in debate over the exact administrative mechanisms for returning those pawned items just so that the municipal budget wouldn't be illegally unbalanced.
So they were revolutionaries who loved accounting.
Exactly.
And nowhere is that tragic irony more glaring than in their treatment of the Bank of France.
Bank of France.
Yeah.
It is the ultimate missed opportunity of the Commune and definitely a focal point of intense Marxist critique.
Because the Commune had physical military control over the Bank of France, right? It was located right in the center of Paris.
They had it completely surrounded.
And inside its vaults were nearly 3 billion francs in gold, cash, and securities.
Just sitting there.
3 billion francs. I mean, that is enough to fund the National Guard indefinitely, enough to essentially buy off the Prussian army, enough to completely stabilize the city's economy.
And yet, they didn't touch the principal wealth. Not a dime of it.
Why? How is that possible?
Well, the Commune appointed a delegate named Charles Bisley to oversee the bank. And Bisley was an old friend of the anarchist philosopher Pierre-Joseph Proudhon. But more importantly, he was a former capitalist himself.
Okay, so he's sympathetic to the institution.
Right. So when Bisley met with the Marquis de Plouc, who was the sub-governor of the bank, the Marquis essentially just bluffed him.
He bluffed, yeah.
Yeah. He convinced Bisley that if the Commune seized the assets, the national currency would completely collapse, and the entire French economy would be ruined.
Oh my God. So instead of seizing the wealth of the bourgeoisie to fund their own survival, what did they do?
They politely asked for modest daily loans.
To pay the National Guard.
Yes, they literally brought their municipal budget requests to the bank governor for approval, like they were applying for a mortgage or something.
That is just, it's absurd. While simultaneously, isn't it true that that same Bank of France was secretly smuggling hundreds of millions of francs out to Versailles?
Yes, they were actively funding the very army that was preparing to slaughter the communards.
Wow.
Marx and Engels were totally ruthless in their critique of this. Engels later wrote that the Bank of France, in the hands of the Commune, would have been worth 10,000 hostages.
10,000 hostages, meaning the leverage would have been immense.
Absolutely. The entire French bourgeoisie would have basically forced the Versailles government to negotiate peace immediately just to save their wealth. By respecting the legalism of the bank, the Commune funded its own destruction.
It is a devastating historical lesson in the limits of reformist legalism during a revolution. But, while they faltered at the Bank of France, they were actually incredibly aggressive in reorganizing local labor.
They were.
We see this in the decree rescheduling commercial debts with a 3-year moratorium without interest, which effectively saved the petty bourgeoisie, those small shopkeepers and artisans, from bankruptcy.
Right, which was politically smart because it aligned their class interests directly with the working class.
Exactly. And they also intervened directly on the factory floor by abolishing the employer's usurped right to levy arbitrary fines on workers' wages.
This was a huge deal for daily life.
Yeah, because under the old system, a factory owner basically acted as judge, jury, and executioner. If a worker was 5 minutes late or wet a miner tool, the boss would fine them and simply pocket the deducted wages.
Just straight up wage theft.
Totally. The Commune criminalized this practice, returning economic agency to the laborer. But the labor decree that stands out the most to me, both for its specific material impact and just its ideological symbolism, is the ban on night work for bakers.
Yes. The battle against the aristocracy of the belly.
I love that phrase. For generations, Parisian bakers had operated in these subterranean, sweltering, flour-choked cellars. They were working all night just so that the wealthy classes of Paris could have fresh, warm bread and croissants first thing in the morning.
It was incredibly brutal labor. It completely destroyed the lungs and the general health of the workers.
So the Commune decreed an absolute end to night work for bakers.
But what is really illuminating about this specific decree is the resistance it faced.
Right. Because the pushback didn't just come from the master bakers who owned the shops and wanted to maintain their profit margins, did it?
No, it didn't. It actually came from regular working-class Parisians who were just accustomed to their morning pastries.
Human habits are hard to break. I mean, we want a revolution, but we also want a fresh croissant at 6 a.m.
Exactly. The consumer demand was so strong that master bakers simply ignored the initial decree passed in April.
They just kept baking at night.
Yep. So the Commune had to double down in May, passing a strict enforcement mechanism.
Yeah.
They stated that any bread baked before 5 a.m. would be legally seized and distributed to the poor, and the bakery owners would be heavily fined.
Wow.
It really demonstrates how deeply consumer culture relies on invisible, exploited labor, and how breaking that exploitation requires active, sometimes coercive, state intervention.
That makes a lot of sense. And taking control of production actually went a step further on April 16th with the decree regarding abandoned workshops.
This is a fascinating experiment.
Yeah, so when the fighting started, many wealthy factory owners and industrial capitalists simply fled Paris. They went to Versailles or out to the countryside, and they locked the doors of their factories, leaving thousands of workers unemployed.
Which is a classic tactic of industrial capitalists during periods of social unrest.
Right.
By stopping production, they throw the workmen onto the street. They're attempting to create this artificial economic crisis that essentially forces the population to beg for the return of the old order.
But the Commune bypassed that crisis entirely. They ordered a comprehensive survey of all abandoned workshops and decreed that they be handed over to workers' cooperative societies.
The workers literally broke the locks, went inside, and started running the factories themselves.
It's amazing.
This is really the embryonic form of a completely new mode of production. The workers formed administrative councils. They elected their own foremen, who by the way, were instantly recallable, just like the politicians.
Of course they were.
They set their own production quotas, they determined their own wages, and they distributed the profits among themselves. They were proving on the ground that the capitalist owner was not actually a necessary component of production.
The workers could manage the complex supply chains and administrative duties of heavy industry completely on their own.
Exactly. Though, true to their obsession with accounting and legality,
Here we go again.
the Commune did include a clause promising that if the capitalist owners ever returned to Paris, there would be a legal process for financial compensation.
So they were seizing the means of production, but like offering to pay a mortgage on it.
That is exactly what they were doing.
So cautious. Yet, despite that caution, the communards really understood that simply alleviating economic misery and restructuring the factory floor wasn't enough to secure long-term liberation.
No, the physical stuff wasn't enough.
Right. Because if they only changed the economic base, but left the ideological superstructures of the Second Empire completely intact, the revolution would eventually be rolled back. They had to dismantle what Marx called the spiritual force of repression.
And that spiritual force of repression was primarily wielded by two massive institutions, the church and the nationalist state.
Okay, let's start with the church.
So in 1871 France, the Catholic Church was deeply structurally entwined with the government.
They weren't separate at all.
Not even a little. The state literally paid the salaries of the priests. The church essentially ran the entire public education system, and it acted as this moral enforcer for the political elite.
So for the communards, the church wasn't just a religious institution. It was the ideological wing of the police.
That's a perfect way to put it. It was the institution that taught the peasantry and the working class that their suffering on earth was a divine mandate, and that obedience to the emperor was basically obedience to God.
Wow. So on April 2nd, the Commune passed a sweeping decree officially separating church and state.
Yes. They ended all national funding for religion and confiscated church properties, transforming them into national property.
And the immediate battlefield for this secularization was the classroom, wasn't it? The Commune ordered the systematic removal of all religious symbols, crucifixes, pictures, dogmas, and prayers from public schools.
Right. They argued that these elements belong strictly to the sphere of the individual's conscience, not the public square.
But this wasn't merely a negative action, right? Just stripping things away. It was a positive, constructive project to redefine the entire purpose of education.
Oh, absolutely. The Commune worked very closely with groups like the New Education Society, which advocated for a system that was free, compulsory, and strictly secular.
The underlying philosophy of this education reform is so striking because the 19th century elite viewed education for the lower classes purely functionally.
Right, like training.
Yeah, you teach them basic math and reading so they can operate factory machinery without breaking it, but you definitely don't teach them philosophy, history, or critical thinking, lest they question why they don't actually own the factory.
They were intentionally producing obedient factory fodder.
Factory fodder, exactly. And conversely, the humanities and high culture were reserved exclusively for the children of the bourgeoisie.
But the Commune rejected that binary entirely. They advocated for an education based on scientific experimental observation rather than religious faith or rote memorization. They wanted to develop what they called a rounded creative personality.
A rounded creative personality. I love that.
Yeah. The goal was an integral education that prepared a child not just for a specific trade, but for active, critical participation in a democratic society.
And this dismantling of traditional hierarchies, rejecting the church's authority over the mind, naturally extended to rejecting the state's authority over the concept of the nation itself.
Yes, which was deeply controversial.
Which brings us to the Commune's radical internationalism, often referred to as the World Republic.
The Commune famously declared that the flag of the Commune is the flag of the World Republic.
And we have to remember the context here. This is an era defined by intense nationalist chauvinism. France had literally just fought a bitter, humiliating war against Prussia.
Tensions were incredibly high.
Yet the Commune completely discarded national borders as a metric of loyalty. They didn't just tolerate foreigners in Paris, they actively elevated them to the highest positions of power.
And the specific historical examples here are just incredible. You have Leo Frankel, right? A Hungarian Jewish worker.
Yes, Leo Frankel.
He was elected to the Commune Council and placed at the head of the Commission of Labor and Exchange.
So a foreign national was literally running the domestic economy of the capital.
Exactly. And then in the military, you have Polish generals, like Yaroslav Dombrowski and Walery Robleski, who were given supreme commands in the military defense of the city against the French National Army.
Consider the modern implications of that for a second. Imagine a contemporary nation, currently at war, actively appointing a foreign national to be the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of Labor, simply because that foreigner shares the same class solidarity and ideological goals as the working class of that city.
People would lose their minds.
It is a total paradigm shift from national identity to class identity.
And Versailles seized on this immediately, as you would expect.
Oh, I'm sure the propaganda was intense.
It was vicious. They told the French provinces, look at Paris. They are destroying French unity. They are a mob run by foreign agitators in international skies.
So how did the Commune justify that? How could they claim to be the true heart of France while simultaneously appointing Hungarian and Polish leaders to run things?
Well, the justification relies on two fundamentally different definitions of unity.
Okay.
The Versailles government, inheriting the imperial logic of Napoleon III, believed in forced, centralized unity. Unity imposed from the top down by a vast bureaucracy, enforced by a standing army, and bordered by strict national lines.
Right, geographical unity.
Exactly. But the Commune viewed that kind of unity as a dictatorship.
They actually called it unintelligent, arbitrary, or onerous centralization.
That's right. In contrast, the Commune envisioned true political unity as a voluntary association of all local initiatives, a spontaneous concourse of individual energies.
So it's organic.
Yes. They believe that authentic unity arises from shared material interests, specifically the shared class interests of the workers and peasants against the exploiting elites, regardless of what language they spoke or where they were born.
Class solidarity replaced nationalist chauvinism.
Exactly. And this terrified the bourgeois politicians in Versailles. They literally could not comprehend a loyalty that transcended a border. So they utilized
The Figaro, which was a prominent conservative newspaper, actually published a completely fabricated list of 44 foreign names, claiming these were the true puppet masters of the Commune, referring to them as the scum and dregs of two continents.
classic scapegoating.
It's a historical tactic we see repeated endlessly, right? If the local working class is rebelling against unbearable conditions, just blame the unrest on outside infiltrators to avoid addressing the systemic grievances.
But the interesting thing is, the Commune did not shrink from the accusation. They embraced their internationalism. They did. And this total systemic rejection of the old social order's hierarchies, the church, the state, the nation, naturally propelled the revolution to challenge the most intimate, pervasive, and deeply entrenched hierarchy of all.
Gender and the traditional family structure.
Exactly.
If you want to locate the true, unyielding revolutionary energy of the Paris Commune, you really have to look at the women. From the very first day on March 18th, when the working-class women of Montmartre threw their bodies in front of the Versailles troops to prevent them from stealing the cannons, women were the vanguard of the movement.
They were on the front lines from day one.
And throughout the spring of 1871, they organized at a level of political sophistication that was entirely unprecedented.
The most prominent and effective organization was the Union des Femmes pour la défense de Paris et les soins aux blessés, the Women's Union for the Defense of Paris and Care of the Wounded.
And it was led by a truly remarkable figure, Elizabeth Dmitrieff.
Dmitrieff is fascinating. She was a Russian revolutionary, incredibly well-read in Marxist theory. And get this, she was only 20 years old at the time.
20 years old. That's incredible.
She had been sent to Paris directly by Karl Marx as a representative of the First International. Under her leadership, the Union mobilized thousands of women across all the arrondissements.
And what is really crucial to understand here is the class composition of this movement, right? This was not a bourgeois feminist movement of wealthy women writing poetry in salons, petitioning politely for suffrage.
Not at all. We actually possessed the exact occupations of 60 of the core executive members of the Union.
Oh, really? Who were they?
They were seamstresses, dressmakers, boot stitchers, hat makers, laundresses, and factory workers.
Working women.
Yes. Because the movement was so deeply rooted in the working class, their demands were not limited to abstract political rights. They were fighting for immediate material survival, workplace safety, and radical economic equality.
Because the capitalist order of the Second Empire had made women's work the most exploited, underpaid form of labor in the country.
Exactly.
The Commune's response to this pressure resulted in decrees that struck at the very foundation of the traditional family. One of the most radical legal shifts occurred when the Commune passed a decree granting pensions to the widows of National Guardsmen who died defending the city. But the truly revolutionary element was a single phrase added to the decree, irrespective of marital status.
The magnitude of that phrase really cannot be overstated.
Explain why it was such a big deal.
Well, in 19th century France, under the intertwined laws of the state and the Catholic Church, a woman who lived with a man without the official sanction of marriage was legally classified as a concubine.
A concubine, wow.
Yes, she was a total social pariah. Any children born to that union were legally illegitimate and possessed absolutely zero rights to inheritance or state support.
So if that man died in a war, the state essentially abandoned the woman and children to starvation.
Completely abandoned them. But the Commune's decree obliterated that legal and moral hierarchy. They stated that if a woman lost her partner or a child lost their father defending the revolution, they were entitled to the pension. Period.
No questions asked about church documents?
None. Common law wives and illegitimate children were instantly granted the exact same legal status and financial support as legally married, church-sanctioned families.
As contemporary historians have noted, this struck a mortal blow to the religio-monarchic institution of marriage.
It did.
It effectively declared that the union of two people was a free act accomplished by two responsible adults, and the state had no business utilizing the legal definition of the family as a weapon to punish women and children who operated outside the church's purview.
And they carried this exact logic into civil partnerships and divorce, which had actually been strictly banned in France since 1816.
Oh, wow. Banned entirely.
Yes. But the Commune instituted a system where a marriage or a separation could be enacted with a simple handwritten declaration brought to the local arrondissement delegate.
That simple.
Yep. No massive church bureaucracy, no exorbitant fees. You wish to be together, you are together. You wish to separate, you separate.
That is shockingly progressive. And simultaneously, the Union des Femmes was aggressively pursuing economic equality.
Right, back to the material conditions.
The Commune officially established the principle of equal pay for equal work, successfully implementing it for female teachers, a victory that wouldn't be seen again in France for decades after the Commune fell.
But their most complex organizing actually happened in industrial labor.
Oh, with the sandbags?
Yes. So with the city under siege, the primary industry was manufacturing uniforms and sandbags for the National Guard. Initially, the Commune, sort of falling back on old habits, contracted this work out to traditional private bosses.
And those bosses continued to pay the female workers starvation piece rates, I assume?
Of course. So the Union des Femmes intervened. They demanded that these lucrative contracts be stripped from the private middlemen. They petitioned the Commission of Labor, run by Leo Frankel, and demanded that the manufacturing be handed directly to female workers' cooperatives.
Which were organized through syndical chambers, right?
Right. A syndical chamber is essentially an early trade union body organizing a specific trade. So the women established a citywide network, electing delegates from each arrondissement, and they negotiated piece rates directly with the government, cutting out the capitalist profit margin entirely.
You really have to picture the scenes recorded in the archives here. The old bourgeois parliament building, the Corps Legislative, was requisitioned and transformed into a massive cooperative workshop.
It's an amazing image.
Just 1,500 women sitting in the former halls of imperial power, sewing sandbags to plug the breaches in the city walls, singing revolutionary songs, and being paid directly by the Commune at a rate of 8 centimes a sack, which was significantly higher than the private contractors had ever offered.
It was the literal materialization of female economic agency.
Yes.
However, we must analyze this objectively.
Yeah.
Because it is very easy to look at these incredible strides and romantically view the Commune as this flawless feminist utopia.
Right. But it was not, was it?
No, it was not. The male revolutionaries in the Hôtel de Ville were still inherently 19th century men.
Right. Product of their time.
Many of them were deeply influenced by that anarchist philosopher we mentioned earlier, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon.
And he had some fairly regressive views on women, didn't he?
To say the least, Proudhon was notoriously sexist. He firmly believed that a woman's only natural place was in the home, as a mother and a wife. He vehemently opposed women entering the industrial workforce, believing it degraded them and lowered male wages.
Yikes. So that ideological prejudice didn't just vanish overnight. The men of the Commune were often reluctant or outright hostile to sharing real political power with women, Women did not have the right to vote for the Commune Council, nor were they allowed to sit as official representatives on it.
And there's a very revealing anecdote in the sources regarding the 10th arrondissement.
Tell us about that.
Well, a female administrator who was successfully running a welfare hostel for the poor was formally instructed by a male commune official that members of the Women's Union Committee were to be kept away from all administrative agencies.
Wow.
Yeah. The subtext was extremely clear. We appreciate you sewing the sandbags and nursing the wounded, but please leave the political paperwork and the actual governing to the men.
That is so frustrating. But the defining characteristic of the women of the Commune is that they just did not wait for permission from the men.
They absolutely did not.
They forced their way into the public sphere. When they were denied official seats, they organized their own mass committees. They dominated the debates in the political clubs. They marched on the Hotel de Ville to demand weaponry to form their own armed battalions.
Right, they wanted to fight.
They published manifestos declaring, "We want to live in freedom or die fighting for it." They proved through their physical labor, their intellectual organizing, and ultimately their blood on the barricades that political leadership and the grueling labor of survival cannot be separated.
And that precise concept that the people doing the physical, manual labor of society should also be the ones shaping its culture and its intellect brings us to the final and perhaps most beautiful layer of the Commune's blueprint.
Yes, the concept of communal luxury and the Federation of Artists.
This is where the Commune transcends a mere political or economic rebellion and actually articulates a profound philosophical project regarding the human condition.
It's so ambitious.
Because under capitalism, and specifically under the rigid class structures of the Second Empire, there was an impenetrable wall between the intellectual and the manual.
Right. The fine arts, painting, sculpture, poetry, high theater, were strictly the domain of the wealthy elite. They were luxuries to be hoarded in private mansions. And on the other side of the wall were the crafts or trades, shoemaking, carpentry, masonry, metalwork.
Right, the stuff you need to survive.
Exactly. These were the domain of the poor. The manager thinks, the laborer sweats.
But the Commune established the Federation of Artists, which was led by prominent figures like the painter Gustave Courbet, to totally tear that wall down. Their manifesto sought to integrate art into the everyday lived experience of the city.
They argued that beauty is not a privilege of the rich, but a fundamental human need.
Yes. And we see this philosophy deeply embedded in their vision for education, which we talked about earlier.
Right, the New Education Society.
The Commune vehemently rejected the idea that a child should be tracked based on their class into either a life of mindless manual labor or a life of detached intellectualism.
It really echoes the modern, often exhausting debate we have today over STEM versus the humanities, doesn't it? The idea that you must choose between learning to code just to get a job, or studying literature and resigning yourself to poverty.
Exactly. It's the same debate. The Commune refused that binary. Their educational goal was the complete integration of the human being. As the original texts articulate, they wanted a society where a child learns a manual trade, ensuring they can produce and contribute to the material survival of the community.
But they also learn to speak, write, and think critically.
Yes. The ideal citizen of the Commune was an individual who wields a tool to earn a living, but who is equally capable of writing a book with feeling.
An artisan who can relax from their daily labor by enjoying high culture, the arts, and the sciences, without ceasing to be a productive member of society.
They term this communal luxury.
Communal luxury. It's a gorgeous phrase.
Because luxury shouldn't mean hoarding gold chandeliers or locking away masterpieces in private collections. Communal luxury means public spaces, parks, architecture, street design, filled with art and beauty that the entire population can experience daily.
And to create that new, egalitarian public space, they recognize the need to purge the physical landscape of the old symbols of oppression. The psychological environment of a city really dictates how its citizens view themselves.
Which leads to one of the most iconic, highly photographed events of the Commune. The tearing down of the Vendôme column.
Oh, this is such a vivid moment in history. This was a massive, towering monument right in the center of Paris, constructed from the melted-down bronze cannons captured by Napoleon Bonaparte during his conquest.
It was huge.
Yeah, it was the ultimate, unmistakable symbol of French militarism, imperial chauvinism, and the glory of the standing army.
So the Federation of Artists, with Courbet acting as a primary advocate, argued that the column was a permanent insult to the conquered nations and a perpetual offense to the concept of human fraternity.
So in May, amidst this massive public festival, they physically dismantled it.
It did.
They toppled it right into a bed of manure and sand. They were reclaiming the visual landscape of Paris.
But, we have to address the strategic reality of this moment.
Right, let's ground this.
Because with the Prussian army sitting outside the gates
Yeah.
and the Versailles military literally blasting holes in the city walls with heavy artillery, how does a government justify spending precious hours and resources debating the democratization of painting?
Yeah.
How do you justify organizing a massive festival to knock down a statue when you are literally running out of ammunition? From a strictly military perspective, focusing on art and communal luxury during a siege seems incredibly naive, perhaps even fatally distracted.
Yeah, to a conventional military mindset, it absolutely is a distraction. But within the framework of Marxist analysis and the communard ideology, beauty and culture were the revolution.
Explain that.
It's a vital theoretical distinction. If the working class fights exclusively for bread, if they only fight for higher wages, shorter hours, and basic survival, but they leave art, science, philosophy, and culture to the aristocracy, then they have not truly liberated themselves.
They've just renegotiated the terms of their exploitation.
Exactly. They would just become well-fed machines. The true social republic, as they envisioned it, required the total emancipation of the human spirit.
Right.
If they didn't assert their absolute right to art, beauty, and intellectual life in the very midst of the war, then the war itself was meaningless. The vision of communal luxury was the ideological North Star. It was the entire justification for the suffering they were enduring on the barricades.
It was the proof that they were fighting for a life actually worth living, not just for survival.
Perfectly said. Let's pull back and look at the entirety of the blueprint we've explored today. Inside the Hotel de Ville, over the course of just a few chaotic weeks, the Commune completely redesigned the concept of the state.
They really did. They smashed the bureaucratic military machine, replacing the standing army with the armed populace. They collapsed the division between passing laws and executing them.
They instituted the universal recalability of every public official and enacted the 6,000 franc salary cap, legally barring careerism and wealth accumulation in politics.
The quantity of extreme democratic accountability forged a new quality of governance, a proletarian democracy.
They executed radical economic triage, remitting rent, suspending the predatory pawnshops, abolishing arbitrary workplace fines, and taking the first embryonic steps toward a cooperative economy by handing abandoned factories over to the workers who ran them.
And they broke the mental fetters of the old regime by legally separating church and state, driving for a secular scientific education system that cultivated a rounded creative personality.
And embracing a radical internationalism that viewed foreign workers as brothers in the struggle rather than enemies of the state.
We also witnessed the extraordinary, relentless rise of the women of Paris. Led by figures like Elisabeth Dmitrieff and the Union des Femmes, they forced their way into the public sphere, demanded equal pay, and reorganized industrial manufacturing.
And they shattered the state-sponsored definitions of the family by securing rights for common law wives and illegitimate children.
And finally, they articulated the philosophy of communal luxury, the demand that manual labor and intellectual life be integrated, and that public space be reclaimed for the aesthetic enjoyment of all.
As you reflect on these blueprints from 1871, consider how shockingly modern these demands remain. Look at the political and social debates we are having today, over 150 years later. We are still fighting over equal pay for equal work.
We really are.
We are still debating how to regulate predatory lending and exorbitant interest rates that trap the working poor. We are still arguing over whether education should produce compliant workers or critical thinkers.
Right.
And we are certainly still searching for a political class that actually shares the economic reality of the people they claim to represent, rather than enriching themselves through the mechanisms of office.
The Paris Commune acts as a profound historical mirror. It forces us to ask why certain basic social structures, which seem so logical, so necessary, and so implementable to a group of starving workers under military siege in the 19th century, are still dismissed as utopian or impossible today.
It is a haunting question, and I want to leave you with one final, lingering historical irony to ponder as we close out Part 4 of the archive. Throughout this analysis, we've seen how the Commune was intensely, almost pathologically focused on legality, fairness, and process.
Their tragic obsession with the ledgers.
Yes, the ledgers. They meticulously calculated the piece rates for female labor at 8 centimes a sack. They created incredibly complex bureaucratic accounting systems just to figure out how to return a 20-franc pond mattress to a starving family without upsetting the municipal budget. And most fatally, they refused to illegally seize the billions sitting in the Bank of France, choosing instead to legally beg for loans from the institutions that were funding their enemies. They played by the rules. They respected the law.
To a fault.
Yet they were ultimately crushed by a Versailles government that abandoned all legality, all process, and all morality, choosing instead to commit a brutal, wholesale military slaughter against their own citizens. So as we look at the historical record, ask yourself, in moments of extreme systemic crisis, who are the true defenders of order and who are the true purveyors of terror?
That is a dark, provocative truth, and it leads us directly into the violent reality of our next session.
Next time, in part 5 of the series, we will leave the legislative halls and the theoretical debates of the Hôtel de Ville, and we will head out into the streets. The decrees have been written, the blueprints are finished, now they must be defended on the barricades. Thank you for joining this deep dive. Keep questioning the structures of history, and we'll see you next time.